Today's lecture is on software requirements. This will be a comprehensive guide on gathering the requirements. We will look at what challenges we face during this phase of the project, what are the root causes for those challenges, how to differentiate between problem space and solution space, and also we'll look at various requirement gathering techniques that is commonly used in the software industry. And finally, we will look at all the phases of the requirement gathering. Let's get started. Let's start by defining what a requirement is. IEEE defines requirement as a software capability needed by the user to solve a problem or achieve an objective. The definition sounds simple, isn't it? However, there are many challenges one faces. Some of the challenges I have faced over the years is that the requirements are often intangible. Sometimes business users will not know what they want, or they are too busy to specify the requirements. Business users will not know how to express their requirements to the developers. And sometimes domain experts are not gathering the requirements, which makes it even more difficult to understand what is being captured. So with these many challenges not handled appropriately, it results in miscommunication between the developers and the business users. The vision of the product will not be understood by the developers. There will be ambiguity in the requirements, and with ambiguity comes volatility and various other associated issues crop up later down the line. So these are some of the issues, but there can be tons of other issues. So what causes these issues? In my experience, there are two factors: internal factor and external factor. External factors are driven by environment and can only be managed as it happens. However, internal factors such as incomplete requirement or ambiguous requirements can be controlled by applying right technique and measures. We are going to learn exactly that in the rest of the video. In order to understand requirements with clarity and completeness, one should be in the problem space. Now, what is the problem space? Problem space is an area of software engineering where questions on business requirements and business processes are asked and answered. The purpose of being in problem space is to understand what the user really needs, why he needs it, and how will it help him to meet the business objectives. Only when the problem space is explored completely, one should step into the solution space. What is solution space? Solution space is the area of software engineering where solutions to the problem space are designed and developed. For clarity, let's look at an example which explains what problem space and solution space is. As you can see on the screen, problem space is the requirement gathering phase of the project, and solution space is your design, coding, and testing. If we were to take an example of migrating your applications to cloud, your problem space would talk about minimizing the cost of infrastructure, running the servers during business hours, no downtime for the applications. Notice how there is a clear distinction between how the problems are defined and where the solution happens. So the question that you ask in the problem space is, what is the need for this project? Why do they require it? And how does it help? And when you move on to the solution space, you would be looking at migrating the servers to cloud to minimize the cost of the infrastructure and probably even right size the compute instances so that further reduces the cost of the infrastructure. And then you will look at auto scaling group to make sure that there is no downtime for the application, and you're going to have some scheduled shutdowns because the requirement is to run the service during the business hours. So that I hope that example clarifies you the difference between what problem space is and what solution space is. Now let's look at the types of requirements. There are broadly three types of requirements: conscious, unconscious, and undreamed requirements. Conscious requirements are those that the stakeholders are particularly aware of. For example, rules for sales tax calculation in stores in different states is known to everybody. The unconscious requirements are those where the stakeholders knows the requirement so well that he or she thinks that it's not worth mentioning. For example, a submit button to complete the purchase in an online store. And undreamed requirements are those that the stakeholder does not ask for, either because he or she thinks they are not possible or because they are new ideas that have occurred. For example, using the machine learning models to deliver to customers' taste. So those are the three broad categories in which the requirements normally fit into. Now let's move on to the requirement capturing techniques. As you can see, there are many different techniques that are there for capturing the requirements. I have just listed down the ones that I have been using over the years. Before we get into these individual techniques, let's understand why we need multiple requirement capturing techniques. The reason why we have multiple capturing technique is because there are different types of requirements. For example, an income tax calculation system consists of taxation rules and which are clearly defined, documented, and those are stable requirements. So most of the requirements for such a system are likely to be conscious. On the contrary, if you take any ticket reservation system which has probably some basic ticket booking facility, it also has some promotional offers, some ability to renting a car, frequent flyer programs, holiday packages, so on and so forth. So in such a system, we may have a fair level of conscious requirements, but there are also a large number of undreamed requirements. That's why the same technique may not give equivalent results in capturing the requirements for these two systems. I hope that clarifies why we need multiple requirement gathering techniques. Let's start with the requirement capturing technique. The first technique is the interviewing technique, which is a formal one-on-one meeting. It usually happens between a stakeholder and a business analyst. It's a question and answer type of discussion. So what the business analyst would have to do is come up with a questionnaire prior to the meeting. This should happen based off of understanding what the background of the stakeholder is and or what the background of the request is going to be. The most important aspect of interviewing is the ability to listen to what the stakeholder is trying to express. So this type of requirement gathering technique is useful for conscious requirements. So the next technique is the brainstorming technique, which is normally used in situations where the requirement is not clear or it's not surfacing that easily. It is useful when there's a group of stakeholders trying to address the same problem and the requirements are not clear. So what you would have to do is you would have to bring all the multiple stakeholders into a room and go through a process of idea generation, idea reduction, and voting. Now the ground rules of brainstorming is no criticism, innovation should take the priority, generate as many ideas as possible, and then eventually reduce to the idea that everyone agrees to, vote for the idea, and the one which gets the most vote is the idea that gets implemented. It is effective for unconscious requirements. Now let's move on to the use case workshops technique. Here, use cases are described from an end user's perspective. It's transaction-based narration in a step-by-step manner. For example, employees should have the ability to apply leaves, view leaves, modify the leave application, view statuses. Supervisor should have the ability to approve leaves, and so on and so forth. So this type of technique is effective for conscious requirement. Now the limitation of this technique is that the stakeholder representing a group may not cover all the functions, and also the non-functional requirements will not be effectively captured. Now let's look at the simulation or prototype technique. Simulation is a technique used to replicate the environment in which the final product will be used. Simulation tests the product behavior under extreme conditions such as load on the test, stress test, so on and so forth. Prototyping is employed to help system designers build an information system that is intuitive and easy to manipulate for end users. So it's an iterative process that can be part of the requirement gathering, requirement analysis, and development phase. This technique is effective for undreamed requirements. Now let's look at the storyboarding technique. A storyboard is a technique used to rehearse typical customer scenarios before the application is built. Storyboards convey a rough idea of the application's behavior and its interaction with the customer. It captures detailed real-world context in which the new application will work. And stories may consist of overheads used in the presentation or animated presentations. Storyboard promotes innovation by capturing the problems people face in the real world. And you can capture all types of requirements using storyboarding. Let's move on to the current system documentation. This is not really a technique, but just a reusing of requirements. There might be situations where requirements specified by the customer has already been implemented, or there are one or more applications which have common functionalities that the customer may not have specified in the current project. So you make use of the existing knowledge or the requirements to come up with your new application. This is effective for conscious as well as unconscious requirements. I hope you understood the various techniques that can be used for capturing the requirements. Depending on the type of application or product, there will be conscious, unconscious, and undreamed requirements. Selecting the right technique is critical because not all techniques are equally suitable for any given situation. A business analyst should have enough knowledge and experience to conduct the requirement gathering sessions, to prepare the questionnaire, or to probe and gather all the information that is important for the success of the project. Now let's look at the life cycle of the requirement gathering. It typically goes through preparation, planning, and execution phase. During the preparation stage, the business analyst or group of business analysts will have to scale up to the domain requirements, identify the tools, define the templates, and agree on the deliverables. The next phase is the planning phase, where the application has to be broken into modules. Stakeholders will be identified. Requirement techniques suitable for each module will be identified. A schedule will be drafted. Resources will be assigned, and workshops will be scheduled. As the planning is complete, the execution phase is mostly about capturing the vision, business process, functional requirements, non-functional requirements, identifying the risks. Eventually, the output or the deliverable of the requirement phase will either be a business specification or a business requirement document. We have come to the end of this lecture. We have learned quite a lot. We learned what a requirement is, the different types of requirements, what are the different requirement gathering techniques, and we also looked at the requirement life cycle. I hope you have learned a thing or two about requirement gathering. If you have any questions about the content or any topic that is not clear enough, do let me know by commenting in the comment section below. And if you like the content, please do subscribe. Thank you.